صباح الخير مجدداً. قبل ما أبدأ بحب إنه تطلعوا هيك شوي حواليكم وتشوفوا الناس اللي موجودة جنبكم، على يمينكم، على شمالكم، مين هني، شو بيعنوا لكم، وين إحنا موجودين بنفس الحيز. وطبعاً هاي مش مفهوم ضمناً. خوشنية تستقلوا يمينة، تستقلوا شمالة. مين يمتصبخ هذا غزة؟ זה לא מובן מאליו. פסיפס שהוא מאוד ייחודי עבורי. ضيوفنا الأعزاء، السيدات والسادة، الحضور الكريم، باسمي وباسم صندوق القدس أرحب بكم جميعاً في هذا الحدث الأول من نوعه، أو كما أحب أن أسميه احتفالية الكفاءة الثقافية المقدسية، وهو نتاج لعمل ضخم ورائع لشراكات مقدسية ومثال لأحد مشاريع صندوق القدس. قصة صندوق القدس بدأت منذ 50 عاماً، ومنذ البدء عمل صندوق القدس على بناء شراكات وجسور بين المجتمعات المقدسية المختلفة، والتي تشكل نسيجاً مذهلاً نراه كنقطة قوة وانطلاقة لكل مشاريعنا. يهدف صندوق القدس منذ البداية إلى دعم، مساندة وتمويل جمهور المقدسيين والمقدسيات على مختلف انتماءاتهم من أجل قدس أفضل. وعلى مر هذه الأعوام نجح صندوق القدس بقطف مئات الثمار والنجاحات. نعتبر الشراكة والاحترام المتبادل أولها. نحن في صندوق القدس نثمن الشراكة ونعمل من خلال بوصلة قيم كثيرة كالمساواة، العدل، التعددية والعطاء. نحتفل اليوم بوجودنا سوياً في هذا الحيز متطلعين نحو التغيير. نحتفل اليوم جميعاً ب50 عاماً مضت وأعوام قادمة من العمل والعطاء لخلق واقع أفضل لنا جميعاً. أتمنى لنا يوماً مثمراً ولتكن انطلاقة نحو التغيير.
אני מצטרף לדבריה של חנין בקשר למגוון שפה בחדר, זה מרתק, יש פה אנשים מזהויות שונות, מקבוצות שונות, יש איתנו אנשים רמים כמו ראש העיר ניר ברקת שידבר תכף, סגן ראש העיר עופר ברקוביץ' שאיתנו, נשיאת הקרן ירושלים יוהנה ארבי פירוג'ה שגם היא תדבר יותר מאוחר, מנכ"ל הקרן ירושלים דני מימרן שאיתנו, וכמובן אנשים מרכזיים מהרבה מאוד ארגונים חשובים בירושלים. זה כבוד גדול בשבילנו ואנחנו מאוד שמחים להיות כאן. אנחנו גם שמחים שזהו בעצם כנס מרכזי מבחינת הקרן לירושלים, שאנחנו במרכז הבין תרבותי לירושלים חווים אותה מבחינתנו, וגם כתושבי העיר אנחנו רואים את המרכזיות של הקרן הזאת במשך 50 שנה, וזה פשוט מדהים לראות מה קרן כזאת בנתה ועשתה וקידמה גם בצד הפיזי גם בצד החברתי כל השנים. ואנחנו שמחים שהקרן בחרה את נושא הקשירות התרבותית לכנס מרכזי שלה בחגיגות שנות ה-50. הקרן לירושלים יחד איתנו לפני 10 שנים התחלנו לעסוק בתחום הזה של קשירות תרבותית. התחלנו בקטן עם בתי חולים ומערכת הבריאות בירושלים. היום אנחנו עובדים עם משטרת ישראל, עם מכללות, עם רווחה, עם סדרה של גורמים ברחבי העיר, והאמת מציון תצא תורה זה גם יצא למקומות אחרים. משרד הבריאות אימץ נהלים שמתבססים על מה שעשינו, משטרת ישראל מעבירה היום במכללה קורסים שבנויים על מה שאנחנו עושים כאן היום בעזרתנו, וכל זה קרה, התחיל בעצם מעשייה משותפת של הקרן לירושלים ושלנו לפני 10 שנים, כך שהכנס הזה עוסק היום כולו בירושלים, אבל אני באמת רוצה לחזור למשפט הזה של מציון תצא תורה, יש פה אמירה להרבה מאוד מקומות, גם בארץ וגם בעולם. אני רוצה להזמין את ראש העיר ירושלים לפתוח את הכנס. אני קודם כל מאוד מעריך את העובדה שראש העיר מבין את החשיבות של הנושא. זה מסר מאוד חשוב לעיר ולעירייה עצמה. בעיריית ירושלים מנהל שירותי קהילה מתחיל עכשיו עבודה על קשירות תרבותית, מתחילות עכשיו סדנאות ותפיסה ועבודה מרכזית, שאני מקווה שתהיה מרכזית גם במנהל עצמו, מנהל שירותי קהילה, וגם בשאר העירייה עצמה, וכמובן יחלחל לשאר המוסדות שבעיר. ראש העיר, בבקשה.
בוקר טוב לכולם, מכובדי סגן ראש העיר עופר ברקוביץ', יוהנה, נשיאת הקרן לירושלים. אני רוצה להודות לך חגי ולכל הצוות של המרכז הבין תרבותי בירושלים על עבודת הנמלים והעבודה החשובה שאתם עושים. יש כאן הרבה מאוד חברות וחברים מעיריית ירושלים, כאמירה ששותפים מרכזיים בתהליך שאנחנו פועלים בו ביחד. אני רוצה לברך את גברת אוזמה שקיר שהגיעה אלינו מטורונטו. Welcome to Jerusalem. It's an honor to host you here. להודות לסינמטק ולכל החברות והחברים שהגיעו לכאן הבוקר. נקודת המוצא לכל הפעילות שאני כראש עיר, ואני מאמין שכולנו צריכים לפעול בירושלים, זה ה-DNA הייחודי של העיר הזו, שלא דומה לשום עיר אחרת בעולם. הוא נזרע לפני 3,000 שנה. כשירושלים הוקמה, היא לא הייתה שייכת לאף שבט, ובפילוסופיה של ניהול העיר, זו עיר ששעריה פתוחים לכלל השבטים, ליהודים ולא יהודים כאחד. לא היה אחד שלא התקבל בברכה בעיר ירושלים. נזכיר שלפני 3,000 שנה עוד לא היו נוצרים, הם הגיעו 1,000 שנה אחרי, ומוסלמים 1,600 שנה אחרי, אבל השערים בעיר היו פתוחים לכולם. יש לי שתי פרשנויות לשתי מושגים שאנחנו מכירים היטב. אחד זה ירושלים עושה כל ישראל חברים. אני מאמין שזה בא מהתפיסה הזאת שבירושלים, בכל רגע נתון, היו נציגים של כלל השבטים של יהודים ולא יהודים כאחד. זו עיר שכל מי שנכנס אליה לא הרגיש אורח, אלא שווה בין שווים בין כלל החברים האחרים. בכל מקום אחר בעולם, יש בעל הבית, יש אורח, אנחנו מארחים אתכם, אתם מארחים אותנו. בירושלים, זה המקום שבכל רגע נתון תמיד ראית נציגים של כולם. ולכן נוצרה דינמיקה שירושלים עושה כל ישראל חברים. גם המשפט הידוע, כי מציון תצא תורה, מבוסס על הפילוסופיה הזו. שאם משהו מצליח בירושלים, ברור לחלוטין שאף אחד בעולם לא מתווכח איתו, זה סטנדרט חדש, כי הוא מקובל על כל השבטים, על יהודים ולא יהודים כאחד. משהו מצליח פה, הוא בשורה שקשה מאוד להתווכח איתה. כי הוא כנראה נופל נכון בין כלל השחקנים. זה הייחודיות של ירושלים שלא דומה לאף עיר אחרת. התובנה העמוקה של inclusiveness, של הכלה, שאם יש שבט שמרגיש לא בנוח בירושלים, ירושלים לא ממלאת את תפקידה. אם יש לנו קבוצה של עולים, יהודים, מוסלמים, נוצרים, חרדים, חילונים, אם מישהו לא מוצא את מקומו, זאת אומרת שמבחינתי זה דגלון אדום צהוב, יש לנו עבודה לעשות. אני רוצה לספר לכם סיפור נחמד. הרציתי בפום, לקבוצת פום לפני כשנה, ושאל אותי אחד הקצינים שם, שאל אותי, היינו אצל עיריית תל אביב, ושאלנו את רון חולדאי, אם אתה מאמין בפלורליזם, הוא כמובן מאמין בפלורליזם, מה איתך? אמרתי לו שבתל אביב, כשאתה שואל מה זה פלורליזם, לכולם יש את אותו מושג. בירושלים יש לנו ויכוח מה זה פלורליזם. תשאלו את חלק מהחברים שאני מכיר במנהלים קהילתיים, יגידו לכם שלכל אחד יש מושג אחר של מה זה פלורליזם. האתגר של להכניס תחת קורת גג אחת, תחת עיר אחת, שאין כמעט קונפליקט בעולם שלא מצוי על שולחננו, בשפת מחשבים זה לא באג, זה לא בעיה, זה תכונה, זה פיצ'ר. העיר שלנו, הקונפליקטים שבה, אם הם לא קיימים, זה לא ירושלים. שהרי לא יכול להיות שמגוון כל כך גדול חי תחת קורת גג אחת בעיר אחת, שלא יהיו בו אתגרים שמחייבים אותנו לחשוב היטב איך מייצרים איזושהי דינמיקה של שיתופי פעולה. ולכן המושג פלורליזם בירושלים הוא מושג מורכב במיוחד. אין עוד עיר בעולם שהמושג סטטוס קוו הוא כל כך מוסכם ושנוי במחלוקת. לא יודע אם אתם יודעים, אנחנו 30 מ-31 חברי מועצת העיר בקואליציה. כולם חתומים על סטטוס קוו. למען האמת, החברה שיושבת באופוזיציה בקדנציה הקודמת הייתה חתומה על סטטוס קוו. כלומר, בליבנו כולנו מסכימים שצריך לחיות בירושלים במסגרת הסטטוס קוו, שלכאורה הוא נושא מוסכם כי כולנו חתומים עליו. מה זה סטטוס קוו בירושלים? זה פשרות חברתיות. זה אומר שיש מגוון של דעות ואידיאולוגיות, ואנחנו לא מתווכחים. זה שיש מסעדות ותרבות בירושלים פתוח בשבת, זה לא כי החרדים וחלק מהציבור הדתי-לאומי חושב שאידיאולוגית זה נכון. זו פשרה חברתית שאנחנו מבינים שבשביל זה לחיות ביחד בעיר, זה מה שצריך לעשות. תשאלו כל שני תושבים, יש להם דעה אחרת איך לשנות את הסטטוס קוו. הר הבית בין יהודים למוסלמים. כל שני תושבים, יהודים וערבים ומוסלמים, יציעו איך לשנות את הסטטוס קוו. כל אחד לכיוון אחר. אבל בשביל לחיות ביחד בעיר הזו, אנחנו צריכים להבין שיש פה פשרות חברתיות, כשכל אחד יודע שהוא לא מקבל את כל האידיאולוגיה שלו בידו. התפיסה הזאת של חיים משותפים, של אינקלוסיבנס, של להתמודד עם הקונפליקטים, של להבין פלורליזם, של לחיות תחת סטטוס קוו, אלה חיים בעיר המיוחדת שלנו בירושלים. עכשיו, מי שחושב שזה מגביל, טועה ומטעה. הפוטנציאל של להתפתח בתוך, במרכאות המכפולות, המסגרת שאני תיארתי, הוא עצום. הוא פשוט עצום. בשנים האחרונות, הרנסנס התרבותי שעובר על העיר, היא דוגמה והוכחה לכך. לעתים אנחנו מקבלים הערות על תהליכים חדשים שאנחנו מובילים. ואני טוען שאפשר לעשות יותר ולהתחשב יותר. ואנחנו רואים איך המגזר החרדי נכנס יותר ויותר לתהליכי תרבות. ואנחנו רואים איך פלורליזם בחינוך, שמבחינתנו הרמת אזורי רישום, ולאפשר לכל הורה לבחור איזה בית ספר שהוא רוצה, איזה תוכן שהוא רוצה. חרדי, חרדלי, דתי, מעורב, חילוני. תאוג'י, בגרות ישראלית, אמריקאית. פרטי וציבורי. אין כמעט כלל אחד בעיר שיכול לחול על כל בתי הספר. ולמרות זאת אנחנו רואים יותר ויותר הצטיינות, יותר ויותר בחירה, פרויקטים איכותיים. אני יכול לתת לכם דוגמה שבשנים האחרונות צמחנו כ-200 תלמידים שלומדים בגרות ישראלית במזרח העיר, רק מבחירה, לכ-2500 השנה. היה לנו בית ספר וחצי, 10 בתי ספר. במגזר החרדי, תוך שנתיים הוקמו גם כן סדרה של 10 בתי ספר צומחים חרדי עם בגרות מוכר ורשמי, 1,000 תלמידים תוך שנתיים. רק מבחירה, אנחנו לא דוחפים, אנחנו שואלים את האנשים שלנו, את התלמידים שלנו, את ההורים, בכל המגזרים, מה אתם רוצים? והפלורליזם הזה במערכת החינוך היא דוגמה מצוינת. לצד פלורליזם בתרבות, היא דוגמה נפלאה לאיך העיר שלנו מתפתחת תחת המסגרות שאני תיארתי. של עיר שהיא אינקלוסיב, שהיא עיר שמחברת, מחפשת להאדיר את השונות ותחת התהליכים האלה, ואני יכול אולי לתת עוד 2-3 דוגמאות מאוד חשובות להעשיר את השיח שבו אנחנו נמצאים. וזה המנהלים הקהילתיים. מבנה ארגוני ייחודי לירושלים. יש לנו 29 כאלה בעיר ירושלים. התיחומים של המנהלים הם ככל שניתן הומוגנים, גיאוגרפיים, דמוגרפיים. יש לנו גם כמה שכונות מעורבות. יש שכונות שכמעט אין שכונה שאין בה מיעוט כזה או אחר אל מול רוב כזה או אחר. ונשאלת השאלה איך אנחנו מאתגרים וממנפים את המעורבות של התושבים, להרחיב את המעורבות של החברה האזרחית, כל אחד בשכונתו לתפיסתו ככל שניתן, איך אנחנו מנחילים את אותה שותפות שיש לנו בהנהלת העיר, גם למנהלים הקהילתיים, גם למגזר השלישי, איך מייצרים? באמצעות שותפות עם הקרן ירושלים, באמצעות שותפות עם המנהלים הקהילתיים, עם המגזר השלישי, עם המגזר האזרחי, יותר private public partnerships, היקפי הפעילות המשולבת שיש לעיריית ירושלים היום עם עמותות, הוא חסר תקדים בהיקפו. יותר ויותר מהפעילות היא עם מאצ'ינגים ברמה כזו או אחרת, בין עם מאצ'ינגים עם קופה משותפת, או לחליפין מאצ'ינגים שכל אחד עושה דבר אחד לצד השני ועושים פעולות יותר משולבות ככה. ואני רואה בתהליכים שהעיר עוברת, תהליכים מאוד מאוד מבורכים. מילה שאני רוצה בהחלט לומר על המרכז המרכז הבין תרבותי בירושלים. עבורי, אני יודע שאתם שמה, ובאמת מייצרים המון גישור פישור, ואני רוצה לברך על כך. אני חושב שהחשיבה שמגזר שלישי מחפש דרך איך לייצר יותר ויותר חיבורים, היא בוודאי לא רק על דעתי, אלא אין לנו דרך אחרת אלא להגיע לשם, ואנחנו נתמוך ונסייע ככל שנוכל. ואני אסיים את דבריי בכמה מילים על קרן ירושלים, שחוגגת בשנה הקרובה 50 שנה. קשה לי לדמיין את ירושלים בלי הקרן ירושלים. קשה לי לדמיין איך העיר הזאת הייתה נראית בלי הנשמה היתרה שהתחיל טדי קולק זכרו לברכה, ורות חשין, ונפילים אחרים שבאמת סייעו לעיר ירושלים במקומות שהעירייה לא תמיד יודעת לעשות לבד, שהמערכת הציבורית לא תמיד יודעת לעשות לבד. התהליכים האלה הם תהליכים שמעשירים והעשירו את העיר, ואני חושב שכל אחד מאיתנו חב חוב גדול, כל אחד בדרכו לקרן ירושלים שחוגגת 50 שנה. יש לי גם הרבה תוכניות איך להיעזר בקרן קדימה, ואני רוצה בהזדמנות זאת באמת לומר, ג'ואנה, תעבירי את המסר הזה בבקשה, וגם לדירקטוריון וגם לכל העובדים המסורים של הקרן ולתורמים של הקרן. יישר כוח ותודה רבה. אני בהחלט רואה את המנופים ואת הסיוע שהמאמץ המשולב הזה, המשותף הזה, משיג לנו. ללא ספק קרן ירושלים היא שותף בכיר בתהליכים החיוביים שהעיר עוברת. אני רוצה לאחל לכם עוד 50 שנה של צמיחה ופיתוח, ואחרי זה נדבר על עוד 50, אני לא בטוח שאנחנו נהיה כאן, אבל בסדר. ובאמת לאחל לכולם המשך כנס מעניין וחשוב, ותודה לכל השותפים שלנו לעירייה ובכלל. המשך כנס מענה, יום טוב, כל טוב.
شكراً للسيد نير بركات رئيس بلدية القدس. والآن أرحب بالسيدة يوهانا الرفيف فروجة رئيسة صندوق القدس. كما أسلفت، الصندوق المقدسي المركزي ذو الأثر الملموس في كل أنحاء وأرجاء المدينة، والداعم منذ 50 سنة لكل مواطني القدس على مختلف انتماءاتهم. تحضر السيدة يوهانا روحاً متجددة حاملة رسالة مبنية على قيم تنادي بالشراكة، التعددية والمساواة والصدارة وتجنيد دعم عالمي من أجل قدس أفضل. أرحب بك صديقتي يوهانا. يوهانا، please.
Boker Tov, Sabak al Khair. Hanin, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's the first time, Sheikh Yano, that I hear my introduction in Arabic. It sounds wonderful. I think my father would be very proud as an Arabic speaker, so it sounded wonderful. Mayor Nir Barkat, who is a busy man, who had to leave us this morning, but thank you for those warm words. It feels great to be here representing the Jerusalem Foundation, and as our dear mayor said this morning, the Jerusalem Foundation is an important component of the city, and I feel very proud to be chairing this organization, and I feel very proud of all of you here this morning. Ofer Berkovitz, Hanin, Hagai, Adit, and all the professionals of Jerusalem Foundation, thank you for the wonderful work you've done to put this conference together. Noah, who's now in Cannes, representing the wonders of the Israeli films, thank you for hosting us, and welcome to all of you. Here we are, in one city with over 800,000 residents, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, secular, traditional, and ultra-Orthodox, a mosaic of languages, a plurality of perspectives. We call this a multicultural city. But you know what? Multicultural cities can be seen all over the world. In fact, there are other multicultural cities even in this country, in Eretz Israel, in Israel. Haifa, Akko, Lod, for example. But what makes Jerusalem so different from these other cities? What is this city special venue for a discussion on cultural competency? I think it's very simple, and we've heard it already from the mayor this morning, from Hagai, from Hanin. Mitzion tetzet Torah. From this place, from a city whose very name means peace, we said there, we are the example for our fellow citizens and for the rest of the world and for humanity, I would say. During times of relative calm, it is easy to practice what we all preach, to adhere to the principles of mutual respect and understanding. These values can be sorely tested, I think, and we would all believe that so, especially in Jerusalem, a city that unfortunately is also well known for its conflict. But we in Jerusalem, and as the new Jerusalemites, we are special and unique. We can proudly say that the values of tolerance, of respecting one another's beliefs, traditions, and custom remain on the public agenda in Jerusalem today and in fact every day. Your commitment to these values, your desire to make Jerusalem the best it can be, is evident by the sheer number of people that are sitting in this room today. You are not here just for an in-depth policy discussion on cultural competency. You are here to focus on the practice, applications of cultural competency in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, in the public sphere, in healthcare, in conflict management, in education, in culture, and in educating and creating a citywide environment that celebrates this wonderful Jerusalem mosaic. In a city that is blessed with such a wide spectrum of cultures, mores, and beliefs, it is up to us to develop tools that create opportunities of shared living and coexistence. And we, and proudly so, at the Jerusalem Foundation, together with our partners, some of which are represented today, and trailblazer in making this happen, promoting multiculturalism in one of the world's most complex capitals. Now, where in the world would you see a mayor like Nir Barkat speak about inclusiveness, openness, multiculturalism, like we've heard from our Mayor Barkat this morning? Thank you to the Jerusalem Intercultural Center, to its staff, not only for being at the forefront of these important issues and the anchor of this conference, but for being a strategic partner on so many issues that are crucial to the development of Jerusalem and to development of Israel, this country in general. And my heartfelt appreciation goes to you, Utzma. Welcome. Our keynote speaker, who will be addressing us shortly, she's flown over from Toronto to offer her insights as the Director of Office of Equity, Diversity, and Human Rights. Mrs. Shakir has dedicated her life on the values of equality, coexistence, and human rights. And we will no doubt learn so much from you, Utzma, from your experience. And I think that this partnership between Toronto, Canada, and you and Yerushalayim will for the future, for new ventures, and I hope that, and I wish that. I hope this is only the beginning of a fruitful collaboration, Utzma, and our partnership between you and Jerusalem. So toda rabah, shukrun, thank you. And I wish you all a successful conference. Atma lakum kul al-chad. Shukran.
Thank you, Johanna, for your wise and smart and warm words. It was really very important to hear. And again, we are celebrating 50 years to the Jerusalem Foundation, so happy birthday to Jerusalem Foundation. From here, we are moving to a course. We are moving to the YMCA Jerusalem Youth Course, which is a choral and dialogue program for Israeli and Palestinian youth in Jerusalem. Their mission is to provide a space for these young people from East and West Jerusalem to grow together in song and dialogue. Through the co-creation of music and the sharing of stories, the chorus seeks to empower youth in Jerusalem to become leaders in their communities and inspire singers and listeners around the world to work for peace. They perform often in Jerusalem and around the world and are honored to be part of bringing about the Jerusalem we would like to see. I'd like to introduce Mika Hendler, the founder and the director of the YMCA Jerusalem Youth Chorus. He will introduce the chorus itself.
جاموسة يا عيني ما لقتهاش، جاموسة يا ليلي لقتها بقرة يا عيني يا ليلي. يا عيني عالجمايس لما تتقابل يا عيني، يا عيني عالجمايس لما تتقابل يا عيني يا ليلي يا جاموسة.
Dear idea of home. Yeah? Oh, is this better? I'm giving a lecture. The idea of home is very, very important to us in the chorus. We really try to create a space, an alternate reality in this troubled city, in which people can actually feel accepted for who they are and actually interact as equals in a space where everyone is valued and everyone's voice is valued for what it brings, even not even despite difference, but because the voices are different. And so as we say at the end of the music video that we made for the following song, which has inspired at this point almost 400,000 people through our music video on YouTube, as we create a home for all of our singers in the chorus, we seek to show what Jerusalem could be.
Hold on to me as we go, as we roll down this unfamiliar road. Although this way is streaming us along, just know you're not alone, 'cause I'm gonna make this place your home.
بعرف شو معاكم انتم، انا كثير انفعلت من ابن عربي على الاقل. اشكر اعضاء الجوقة المميزة وانتظر المزيد من نتاجكم الرائع. ادعو السيدة عظمى شاكر لتشاركنا روائعها. ارجو لفت الانتباه الى اننا نرحب بالاسئلة بحال انتهاء المحاضرة. عظمى شاكر is the Director of Equity, Diversity and Human Rights Division at the City of Toronto. She has been a community-based researcher, advocate, and activist. Udma holds many degrees and diplomas in English literature, international relations, law and diplomacy, and an honorary diploma from the School of Social Community Service and the School of Deaf and Blind Studies of George Brown College. She was an Atkinson Economic Justice Fellow and an adjunct professor at the Department of Geography and Program in Planning, University of Toronto. Her work in Toronto focuses in embedding equity in all corporate programs, policies, and services in the city, developing equity resources, advising on cases, equity, diversity, and human rights to the mayor office, city council, and all of the city divisions, as well as to the residents of Toronto. Udma has received many awards of her activism, among them the J.S. Wordsworth Award of the Outstanding Asian Canadian Award. Udma, we are very happy to have you. I feel very, emotional about it. And I hope that all of us will get something. It's kind of a gift for me, at least. The floor is yours, and I'm really happy, honored to have you, all of us.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me. Coming to Jerusalem is a unique opportunity. I did not expect to be here, but I'm very glad to be here. I consider this an invaluable opportunity for learning and exchange of ideas. In order to address the theme of culturally competent city, I would like to address three things. I want to look at demographic and conceptual understanding in understanding the Canadian environment. I want to give some examples of how alternative approaches are being used in Toronto. And finally, I'd like to speak about the role that the City of Toronto, which is the municipal government, is playing in building equity and inclusion. Ultimately, cultural competency is about building equity and inclusion in a society. However, at the outset, I would like to point out that this analysis is entirely based on my personal experience of being in Canada for 28 years, for working in the NGO sector, which is the non-governmental sector, for over 20 years, and for working with the government now for approximately 6 years. I believe that my knowledge, or any knowledge, is always subjective. So I want you to understand who I am, because otherwise my analysis means nothing. This is not an academic exercise. This is a personal commitment. So like I said, I came to Canada 28 years ago. In one long flight from Karachi, Pakistan to Pearson International Airport in Toronto, my life changed dramatically, and it has never been the same. One day I was living comfortably as a privileged young woman in Karachi, dreaming of taking over the world. Everyone in Pakistan wants to take over the world. So, needless to say, I wanted to do it too. Next thing I know, I was living in Scarborough, trying to fit into my spouse's life with a small baby who found me just as scary as I found my life. My son, when he was little, every time I touched him, he would start crying, because he knew this woman doesn't know anything about raising children. He's 27 years old. He still cries when he sees me, but that's for a different reason. I'll tell you that story another time. And now I even have a daughter, as if one was not enough. I can't even begin to tell you the nightmare she gives me. But anyway, overnight, I lost my home, my family, my historical connection, my cultural mooring, and most importantly, I lost my personal identity. I went from being a carefree young woman whose only interest in life was to make my parents' worst nightmares come true to becoming a sponsored spouse. My life was now measured not in how late I can stay at a party, but whether I would lose my legal status in Canada if my sponsorship agreement with my spouse broke down. Imagine if I was a refugee or an undocumented person. How much more precarious my journey would have been. Activism, therefore, to me, has never been a choice. It is a moral obligation. It is a moral imperative. It is not charity. It is ultimately a selfish act because it allows me to claim my space in Canada with others who are claiming the same kind of space and to build a new meaning for my life and that for my Canadian-born children. I ended up in social activism when my personal story intersected with someone else's. One night, my lawyer's spouse, and that's another story, by the way, never marry a lawyer. I could tell you a few stories about that one. But one night, my lawyer's spouse asked me to help a client of his. He wanted me to get information about services for Urdu-speaking South Asian women so he could help a woman in a violent family situation. That was the day I realized that Canadian stories are connected to each other, that we are not alone. And with that realization, my isolation turned into empowerment. This woman and I shared a common bond. We were both from Pakistan. We were both women who came to Canada as immigrants, or immigrant spouses, both dependent on our partners for support. Whatever our personal histories may have been in Pakistan, in terms of class or education or family, in Canada, we were bound to each other by our shared immigrant experience. The exception was that she was also being victimized by violence in the home, lack of access to services due to language difficulties, and an inability to navigate the Canadian society. This reality led me to the social service sector, but more specifically, ethno-racial, ethno-cultural sector. I volunteered and did part-time work in the South Asian sector for about 10 years until my kids were able to go to school full-time. I then became the executive director of an umbrella organization called Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. The reason this is important is to know, for you to know, is because the Canadian context of cultural competency is complex. And my location, my actual history, allows me to see cultural competency in that light. Once I embarked on the road to social activism, I found many more intersecting Canadian narratives that have given me a new sense of identity, community, home, history, and cultural reality. All the things that I thought I had lost. I also understand now that my personal story is part of globalization and the role cities play in it. And because of that, now I know, for example, that women in Canada, no matter how different from each other, share a common cause. That as an immigrant, I'm tied intimately by experience to strangers from Africa, Latin America, Asia, Middle East, Europe, who now call Toronto a home. That my Canadian-born children have actually changed my sense of personal story and history and identity from being a Pakistani in Canada to becoming a Canadian of Pakistani origin. But most importantly, in that process of becoming, I have no choice but to fight for an equitable and just society because Canada is a shared experiment worth fighting for. And because my rights are tied inextricably to someone else's struggles. I cannot fight for my rights if I don't align myself with other people's struggles. You cannot create equity for yourself and not anybody else. It doesn't work. The emergence of cities as global entities is important to understanding the Toronto story. Cities have always played a crucial role in defining various civilizations and historical trajectories of human experience, learning, cultural production. Rome, Andalusia, London, Paris, Jerusalem, New York, Baghdad, Damascus, just to name a few. But today, cities are increasingly becoming the crucible where global forces collide and competing interests and rights play out in the same space. This is where cultural pluralism, competing values, divergent aesthetics, and contested political claims are enacted, experienced, and negotiated. Factors that define global cities are diverse and often manifest themselves as competing claims over political spaces, different identities, claims to citizenship rights, claims to cultural and linguistic rights, and struggle to define and appropriate spaces crucial to claiming those rights. Access to services, in my estimation, is a part of that contest for equity and ultimately justice. In this discourse of contestation for rights, cultural competency can be viewed in two ways. It can either be seen as paternalistic and prescriptive, that is something you do for others who have either limited or unequal power to claim their rights, or it can be transformative and critical. That is, you consciously produce spaces that address those power differentials in a meaningful manner and eventually lead to an equitable and just society. In other words, either cultural competency can mean being nice to people while maintaining the status quo of inequality, or it can mean empowering marginalized people to take control over their own destiny and to change the conditions in society to produce equitable and just outcomes. However, this transformative approach requires an honest recognition of who's marginalized and why, and then consciously co-creating the conditions for inclusion. In this sense, Toronto has its challenges, just like Jerusalem, but provides some useful lessons. Global cities where these claims and counterclaims are being articulated and negotiated sometimes use public policy and institutional arrangements to address these claims, but sometimes those claims are, those who are marginalized occupy and create their own spaces, thus challenging the existing power relations. In my opinion, both of these methods, whether it's public policy or people taking over spaces themselves, are legitimate in any democratic society. There is a distinction being made in Canada between cultural claims and cultural competency. While cultural claims have historical, legal, or citizenship roots, cultural competency is either a rationale for that claim or a preferred method of service delivery. To appreciate this observation, one needs to understand the Canadian context. There are, in fact, 3 cultural narratives of diversity in Canada that are compelling and crucial to understanding who's making these cultural claims and why, because they are tied to different historical experiences. Firstly, and most importantly, I think, there is the indigenous, or what are called Aboriginal peoples, claim of being culturally and linguistically diverse nations and being the original peoples of the land. They are broadly divided into First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, but within First Nations, there are multiple nations, Mohawk, Cree, Ojibwe, etc., etc. Their claim to the land is an important narrative in the social justice movement, in public policy, and in service delivery in Canada generally, and Toronto specifically. There are approximately 70,000 Indigenous peoples in Toronto. They have a unique relationship as sovereign nations and peoples with the state of Canada, a fact that was recognized in 2010 in something called the Statement of Commitment to the Aboriginal Communities by the City Council, which is the government, municipal government. This statement, in fact, acknowledges the right to self-determination by Indigenous peoples. Indigenous cultural narratives are those of a colonized people. One of the most pernicious aspects of this history is the residential school policy, which was government sanctioned and operated from about 1870 to as late as 1996. Under this policy, Indigenous children were taken forcefully from their home and placed in church-run residential schools where their names were changed, they were not allowed to speak their language, they were subjected to abuse. Those who died were buried in anonymous graves without their parents ever knowing what happened to them. And all cultural connections were deliberately broken. The idea of the government was to solve the so-called Indian problem by assimilating the children into mainstream culture and society. This historical fact was acknowledged openly when in 2008 the government of Canada set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to collect testimonials of survivors of residential schools. The commission ended its deliberation in December 2015 with a calls to action report. The City of Toronto, the municipal government, has adopted the entire report and is now implementing those actions which fall within its jurisdiction. So it is important to recognize that all levels of government have accepted that this was a historical fact and that we actually need to do something about it. Since history of Indigenous peoples in Canada has been violent and oppressive, and they continue to be marginalized in society, cultural competency discourse to them is not important and is not a matter of seeking sensitivity and accommodation in society, but rather it is a claim to self-determination and access to their legal, constitutional, and historical treaty rights. Hence, their model of organizing and service delivery tends not to be cultural competency, but cultural safety. This is a concept built on the notion of protecting and, in fact, resurrecting cultures that are threatened, and in some cases, they have been lost. The Indigenous histories and worldviews are diverse and distinct from what they call settler society, and they seek to reclaim their land, their identity, and their access to power in society by taking ownership of their own services in a manner consistent with their own histories and cultures. Given their distance from power structures in Canada, the act of creating their own cultural practices is in fact their claim to their fundamental rights in society. The second cultural narrative is the French claim to the accommodation of French identity, a minority in Canada except in the province of Quebec, as a distinct nation, culture, and language in the national discourse. This is a claim that is asserted and in fact acknowledged by the state as one of the two founding peoples of Canada. It's interesting how the Aboriginal claims are not considered part of founding of Canada. It's the English and the French. Unlike the Indigenous claims, French claim to protection of its culture and language as a minority in Canada has actually found a more significant expression by being embedded in the constitutional arrangement of bilingualism and biculturalism. Other than Quebec, not all provinces of Canada are truly bilingual, but all federal institutions and practices have to be completely bilingual. I cannot get a job in the federal government because I'm bilingual, but I speak Urdu and English, not English and French. You have to speak English and French in order to even get a job with the federal government. Given this proximity or this closeness to the state power, Francophone claims have actually become part of the mainstream society. Unlike Indigenous claims, even though both have legal roots in the Constitution. But what is interesting is the French claim has actually institutionalized the notion of difference in Canadian national identity. At the very least, the Canadian identity is dual in nature, English and French. And this, ironically, has paved the way for other claims to be naturalized. Lastly, but importantly, there is the immigrant refugee narrative of diverse populations having migrated to Canada and are now calling it home. They claim, people like myself, their claim to their cultural and linguistic rights has found expression in Canadian multiculturalism narrative. However, unlike Indigenous claims to self-determination, our claim is our right to cultural self-expression. The interesting thing is that the multicultural discourse historically was actually initiated in order to give the Quebecois, which is the French of Quebec, the space to claim their right to language and culture. It was in, I think it was under Pierre Trudeau, the father of our current Prime Minister, in 1971, that Canada adopted a multiculturalism policy to address the grievances of the French minority in Canada, and thereby making Canada, in effect, a bilingual and bicultural state. The Multiculturalism Act of 1988 merely codified this reality but broadened its scope as the demographic landscape of Canada was changing. Hence, the multiculturalism discourse has since then been applied to and claimed by most or mostly ethno-racial, ethno-cultural people like myself. These people have migrated to Canada throughout its history, but in large numbers in the 1980s, they came from across the globe, especially Africa, Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. So when immigrants and refugee population in Canada lays its claim to citizenship, it does so both to seek accommodation of its needs in mainstream and public institutions of Canada, but more importantly, as a claim to self-expression through the creation of culturally specific services. This has led to the establishment of a vibrant ethno-racial, ethno-cultural sector in Toronto. The very raison d'etre for this sector is that their governance and service delivery is shaped by and for a specific cultural community, and that in fact defines their claim to cultural competency. For example, like I said, I worked for over 20 years in the South Asian specific sector. Actually, the funny thing is, I didn't know I was a South Asian till I arrived at Pearson Airport. I actually thought I was a Pakistani. And I don't know if you know the history of South Asia, we actually don't like each other in South Asia. Like Indians don't like Pakistanis, Pakistanis don't like Bangladeshis, Bangladeshis don't like anybody. Like, you know, so I come to Canada and suddenly I'm South Asian, which is a very interesting dynamic because I didn't know I actually liked each other. We like each other, but hey, that's what life is all about, right? So to understand the context for these competing claims in Toronto, it is important to appreciate the demographic profile of the city. And I hope to God that I am doing something right, probably not. This is an interesting, how do I go forward? Press this? If Toronto was a village of 100 people, it would look something like this. I just want you to see the diversity. Will it move by itself or should I move it? Okay. In terms of citizenship, status, and language, 48 would be born in Canada, 50 born outside of Canada from over 200 different countries, 2 would be refugees or temporary residents, 47 have a mother tongue other than English or French. Racial identity and ethnicity, 53 would be white, 12 would be South Asian, 9 would be other Asian, 8 would be black, 11 would be Chinese, 1 would be an Arab, and 1 would be Aboriginal. In terms of faith and religion, 60 would be Christian, 19 would be non-religious, 7 would be Muslim, 5 would be Hindu, 4 would be Jewish, 3 would be Buddhist, 1 would be Sikh, and 1 would have another faith. Believe me, there are other faiths. I know, I wondered too. 13 would be between the ages of 15 and 24. 57 would be between the ages of 25 and 64. We talk about the gray tsunami because the population of Canada is aging. In terms of sexuality and gender identity, 10 to 15 may be lesbian, queer, transsexual, transgender, gay, questioning, or bisexual. And this is because people don't self-declare, so, you know, one is not sure, but 10 to 15. And I must tell you that since 2012, Canadian Human Rights, the Ontario Human Rights Code has acknowledged gender identity and gender expression as protected grounds. 17 people would be age 15 and over and would have some form of disability. 39 of those 25 years or older have a university degree, certificate, or diploma. 18 of those 25 years or older have not graduated from high school. 52 would be female. At least we are ahead. Good, eh? We live longer. But our income is less. Typical. Yeah, you can never win. 50 are employed, 4 are unemployed. Then medium household income between lone female parent and lone male parent, of course, as you can see, is approximately $10,000 less. And 25 are low income. Income inequality in Canada is growing at a very alarming rate, and we need to pay attention to it. And not only is it growing, it's people who are racialized who are actually becoming more poor. At least one person would have an emergency shelter, would use an emergency shelter, and about 2 people would use a food bank. %46% of households are renters, 54% are owners. Very high percentage of people who are renting, which means that they're basically going, sometimes 70% of people's wages go into rents, which is leading to low income. People are never able to get out of poverty. So, that to me, can I stop it now or will it keep going? I hate to repeat myself. But I thought at least this would give you an interesting perspective on the diversity of the city. Canadian landscape, therefore, is made up of what I would describe, like I said, claims that are cultural and institutional arrangements that are tied intimately to claims over rights of self-determination and citizenship. The areas of contest cover a wide range of sectors from health to social services, settlement services for immigrants and refugees, including language instruction for newcomers, welfare, social housing, childcare, youth services, legal services, violence against women services, advocacy and social justice, research and policy, employment, recreational services, social planning, cultural activities, and educational services. So all the entire spectrum of services. Ultimately, these claims are a means to an end. They are seen by Indigenous, French, and ethno-racial communities as a way to achieve equity and inclusion in society. When it comes to notions of cultural sensitivity or appropriateness or competency, these terms are used more to describe the type of service being delivered rather than the end of the service. Interestingly, just like Jerusalem, it is the health sector that has taken the lead in Canada generally and Toronto specifically in this field. Partly, I think, is because of the demographic shift, and partly because the healthcare sector has been influenced by the emerging discourse of social determinants of health. Research in social determinants of health has provided very strong and compelling evidence that social and economic barriers such as poverty, social exclusion, job insecurity, inadequate housing, food insecurity, level of education, immigrant refugee status, and systemic racism are equally or more important to a person's health than medical care. So the health sector has responded to this reality by actively investing in and adopting a cultural competency approach, but one that is based in organizational change theory. Health organizations are doing 2 things. One, they're changing the nature of the organization itself to meet its pluralist demands by either diversifying the staff, also diversifying the governance, and also diversifying services. But secondly, and more importantly, they're investing in social justice interventions under the terminology of health equity. To give you my personal experience, for the past 1 year, I've been a member of a health equity committee. It is an arm's-length body established by the Provincial Ministry of Health to provide advice to the healthcare system in Ontario. We just finalized a report to the ministry on how to embed health equity in the entire delivery of healthcare services in Ontario. We define health equity as, and I quote, allowing people to reach their full health potential and receive high-quality care that is fair and appropriate to them and their needs, no matter where they live, what they have, and who they are. We worked on the premise that certain life experiences have a profound impact on our ability to stay healthy and access the healthcare system. They include poverty, discrimination, level of literacy, cultural and linguistic barriers, homelessness, job insecurity, uncertain status, immigrant, refugee, undocumented, indigenous, risk of criminalization, etc. For example, this is again a personal example. My nephew, who's a doctor, has established his clinic in what is called a priority neighborhood, which is low-income neighborhood, in Toronto, and is part of a group of young doctors who are moving their focus away from primary care to social care. Their clinic focuses on community health model, where they engage the community on working on its own health outcomes, thus paying attention to the community's cultural and religious beliefs, notions of healing, etc. But what is even more important is that they themselves, as professionals, are taking responsibility for improving the social conditions of their clients in order to improve their overall health outcomes. What they're saying is, if we don't do that, people walk in the door, we cure their illness, they walk out, and live in the same conditions that created the illness in the first place. So it's not good enough for us to say, well, I'm a doctor, I'm only going to take care of your health. Health is more than just absence of disease. So for example, in their clinic, they are running financial literacy classes, they do job search training and work with employers to get employment for their clients. They liaise with municipal government and particularly institutions like the police to deal with issues of racial profiling, criminalization, other things that impact negatively, particularly young racialized men. Increasingly, therefore, it is becoming quite clear that social justice interventions are critical since rights and claims to citizenship are inextricably tied up with realities of access to services. Hence, in Toronto, the municipal government, whose mandate is to serve all its residents in an equitable manner, and the community-based sector, whether indigenous or ethno-racial or mainstream, whose mandate is to serve their communities, have developed a symbiotic relationship. They rely on each other to ensure that the rights of all citizens are protected without any exception. City of Toronto, in fact, has a twofold relationship with the community-based sector. It funds community-based agencies to deliver those services that the government cannot deliver, but it also relies on the service sector to empower communities and build civic resiliency of its clients in a manner that creates the conditions for a robust civil society where democratic practices can flourish. It's not just the responsibility of the government to create democracy, it's also the responsibility of the government to fund its community-based organizations who actually build the civic resiliency. In Toronto, the three cultural competency narratives mentioned above fall vaguely into three approaches. There is the indigenous approach, the ethno-racial cultural approach, and the mainstream approach. Given the cultural destruction and loss of identity, when indigenous communities organize and deliver services, they demand, like I said, self-determination, which means services by and for indigenous peoples. It is their claim to constitutional legal rights. Hence, all City of Toronto divisions, for example, all my colleagues at the municipal government, when they work with the indigenous communities, they make sure that we do not impose our processes on the community. Our approach has been to provide the resources and the conditions for the communities to self-organize and be independent in delivering services, be it housing or childcare or child welfare or health or employment. Even the criminal justice system in Ontario recognizes the need for an Aboriginal justice strategy and approach. Apart from respecting the unique position that Indigenous populations have within the Canadian context, it is clear that Indigenous worldview that underpins all issues of justice and governance, including service delivery, is often completely different from the mainstream society. For example, Indigenous tradition of model of service delivery in fact questions the Western paradigm, which they see as being based on individual psychology, contrary to Indigenous notions of health, which is based on a paradigm that believes in balance between four aspects of a person's nature: mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. Indigenous approach to health and justice are about collective orientation, not individual. They are not linear. They emphasize oneness with nature. They are holistic, and they are focused on wellness and community healing and not just individual healing. Indigenous communities place special emphasis on cultural continuity to rebuild an understanding of individuals of their place in a particular cultural history so that they feel connected with the culture. Remember what I told you about the residential schools. When you have a history where your culture has been destroyed, you cannot deliver services in a way that doesn't connect and rebuild and resurrect that culture. That's why cultural safety, cultural continuity is very important. It is a circular model that the Aboriginal communities, the indigenous communities use. Cultural competence is actually seen, like I said, along a continuum with the end goal being safety. Cultural awareness, they recognize that as an acknowledgement of difference. Cultural sensitivity is respecting differences. Cultural competence is having the skills, knowledge, and attitude to deal with difference. An ultimate goal is cultural safety, that is self-reflection leading to empathy and advocacy for self-determination. It is important to understand that to indigenous communities, cultural competency, therefore, is not enough. In the context of indigenous histories in Canada, an inclusive society is one that respects their difference and acknowledges and asserts their right to independence and self-determination. In contrast to the indigenous approach to self-determination, the ethno-cultural, ethno-racial sector seeks to claim its right to citizenship through self-expression. Like I said, the very raison d'etre for that sector is that given Toronto's enormous diversity of mainstream service, the mainstream service provider cannot possibly address the needs of all those diverse communities you just saw in a sensitive, competent, linguistically specific manner. How many people are you going to hire? How many languages will you translate it? So what they're saying is the mainstream institutions sometimes are finding it very difficult to be culturally competent. The issue then is not competency, but A, revealing the cultural limitations of mainstream society that privilege European culture and values, and B, community building by creating equitable but negotiated spaces to accommodate the diversity of the population. Hence, it's interesting, our sector, the ethnocultural sector, is both a critique and an opportunity. I ran an ethno-specific organization, like I said, for 8 years. Our rationale was that we are an umbrella organization of social service organizations that serve the diversity of the South Asian community. That means Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, especially Tamil, Nepalese, Bhutanese, and Maldivans. You didn't even know about them, right? Yeah. That's how many South Asians we are in Toronto. We acknowledged that South Asianness is a very Canadian experience, but one that provides both a unique opportunity to build a new Canadian cultural identity amongst us, but more importantly, a way to build solidarity with other cultural communities and between us. We pay attention to representation of diverse religions, linguistic and settlement needs of South Asians, but the ultimate aim was to fight for social justice and equity. You can imagine, oh, I'm running out of time and I have so much to say. I thought I came, man, 11 hours I came. But I appreciate that. Our claim to our citizenship is founded on the principle of unity within diversity, which we think is the expression to being Canadian. In my experience, the ethno-specific approach actively uses culture, but in the context of competency, not in the context of competency, but rather as a form of organizing and critique. The very justification for this sector lies in the fact that an ethno-specific approach allows those communities that are distant from the European Canadian cultural norms and a system of power to create their own culturally linguistic safe spaces. In this sense, our very modus operandi is the challenge to the mainstream practice, and in that sense, process, we hope to make our claim to Canadian citizenship. The presence of these competing claims and approaches and the changing demography of Canada and city like Toronto has necessitated also a change in the mainstream institutions. particularly health institutions, but also service delivery. Increasingly, mainstream institutions are being forced to unpack their own power and privilege in order to become aware that power and privilege influences decision-making, distribution of capacity to enforce decisions, and access to resources and opportunities. Working on the assumption that cultural values often reflect and give privilege to the norms and values of the dominant culture, mainstream institutions like governments, schools, colleges, service providers are beginning to understand that even though they were made for and by society as a whole, in effect, in a pluralistic society like Toronto, they actually reflect European culture and values. The dramatic demographic shift has meant that mainstream institutions are no longer able to retain their universal neutrality and are therefore they have to question their own cultural power. Given this fact, what mainstream institutions are doing is, in a sense, to reimagine themselves, both to reflect and to serve the diversity of the population. A whole new discourse and practice of diversity organizational change has developed that is holistic and strategic. There's leadership commitment. Large institutions actually have equity, diversity in their mission and vision, as well as developing clear policies on equity and diversity. There's resource allocation. Major hospitals now have cultural competency or equity and diversity offices or departments, like my division in the municipal government. Representative governance. Large institutions, service organizations are diversifying their board of directors so that their actual governance and decision-making is diverse. Major hospitals, most school boards are taking training to be sensitive, building their awareness, knowledge, and values. They're hiring diverse staff, which is the simplest route to competency, so that the population, the diversity of the population can be represented, and of course, community engagement. All of this is being done in order to become relevant and to serve as best as we can. The best example of this approach is to be found in the government, in the public sector, in the Toronto Public Health, which emphasizes that health of Toronto particularly needs to focus on low-income people, people with disabilities, Indigenous people, racialized women, immigrants, and refugees. Public health delivers its services through very diverse workforce, and they pay attention to cultural competency in terms of service delivery. But I'd like to end with the municipal government and its role in actually meeting the needs of the City of Toronto. Our government has made an official commitment to equity and diversity. Our motto is diversity, our strength. In 2011, my division was created with a corporate mandate, which means that everything we do, even though we are very small, we are placed in the city manager's office, who's the highest bureaucrat, and so everything we do applies to the entire City of Toronto. And we focus on one thing which is important, and I'm wondering if I can actually show you. Can I just show that one slide? This is basically the philosophy that we are adopting. We are here in the second box. The first one is you treat everyone equally. The problem is then you don't care if some people are not getting equitable outcomes. The second one is where we are at. It is important to recognize who's marginalized and how, and address that in order to produce equity of outcome. Where we want to be is the third one, where you actually build a society with equity in mind. So I just thought this is a very interesting way of showing it, but just to give you a couple of examples, just bear with me. I know. I mean, Jews and Muslims are the same. They can't stop talking. One of the examples that I want to give is that City of Toronto is the first city in Canada that has become a sanctuary city. What it means is that we have declared that undocumented people who have no immigration status, or at least whose immigration status has expired, can access City of Toronto services because our services require us to be residents in Toronto, not immigration status. That may be the responsibility of the federal government and the provincial government, but not us. So the council unanimously approved what is called Access TO. And our staff follow a principle which is very simple. Don't ask, don't tell. We don't ask, you don't tell. As long as people are living in Toronto, they can access our services. One other thing that we are doing which I think is of interest to you, is that we are recognizing that social determinants of health are important. And, as Gandhi said, if you need, be the change that you seek. There's no point in talking about change out there. You have to practice change. So what we are doing is, we recognize that people are poor because they don't have access to employment. Well, guess what? City of Toronto is a huge employer. So we are opening up our employment practices and actually committing ourselves to diversity hiring. Which is, we are not there yet, but we are trying. One very interesting program which I think you might be interested in is social procurement. City is a huge corporation that does business with a lot of businesses. And we are saying, if you want to do business with us, you need to show that you practice diversity hiring, you have diversity in your supply chain, you actually bring us not just a monetary value, the lowest bid, but you have to show what social impacts you can make while you do business with us. Do you hire local youth? Do you build communities? Do you do something to help our communities so that you can do business with us? It's not good enough to say we have the lowest bid. I think these are important things because this means we are practicing what we preach. And I would like to end. I know, he's breathing down my neck, and I don't want him to feel embarrassed. I appreciate you, man. Yeah, I know. Hey, we have to take care of each other. So in conclusion, the landscape of equity and inclusion in Canada is clearly to use cultural competency as one of the means to make claims to fundamental rights. In my estimation, if we do not use cultural competency to address inequality in society, then it is not a useful construct and can in fact be dangerous because it is merely saying, I will not make you equal, but I'll be nice to you by appropriating your culture selectively. However, if we were to say, let's co-create a society where we can be equal and use cross-cultural solidarity through competency so that we do not get lost in translation, then it does become a powerful tool for transformative change. Ultimately, any global city that is proud of its diversity and multiculturalism must practice social justice as a moral and social responsibility. We have no choice in this matter. Thank you very much.
Not only this has been very, very interesting, it's been amusing and enriching, and I think we really, from Jerusalem, have a lot to learn from you. As a small token of appreciation from the Jerusalem Foundation, please accept this gift from us.
Thank you.
And you have to promise us that you'll come back and you will be by our side in taking this forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much and well done.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I will take I know you have burning desire to ask me questions. I was told that Israeli audience can be direct. I was told not to take it personally, but to actually appreciate it for what it is, so I will do that.
I'm not sure we have time for questions, unfortunately. We're going to do it later. Okay.
Not even one question?
Yep. I will say something and we'll talk about it later. Uzma, first of all, shukran jazilan al muhadara. Okay, thank you very much for the lecture. It was
עכשיו אני צריכה להגיד תודה רבה?
No, you don't have to. Mushroom. I want to thank you very much. It was very inspirational. In fact, I'm looking on this, and I would be very happy if we will have it in every office, in wherever we work, because I think it summarizes very well, the approach that we are talking about. You know, I've seen the second parts before. No, we are using it in some of our demonstration. I didn't see the real thing, the real thing. You know, the reinventing society.
Yes.
To adapt it, and I think that it's really very important. I want to say that originally I thought that no, Jerusalem is a much harder case than Toronto. After listening to what you are doing and the challenges over there, I think there are things that are very similar more than we thought. Especially when we talk about political philosophy of liberalism, and Toronto is a liberal city, many times people compare between what we call thick multiculturalism and thin multiculturalism. The Quebec is an easy case. You know, they want to be francophones, but they are liberals.
Yeah.
The Inuits, the Aboriginal, the indigenous are totally different than this. And one of the challenges that we have here, in fact, the mayor was talking about it today, is the fact that it's much easier to be pluralistic in Tel Aviv, where everyone thinks the same, than in Jerusalem, when even there isn't understanding of what is pluralism. So when you have people that think so different from each other, the challenge is also in Toronto and also here. We have a lot of political issues to solve, but that's a part of the process. I wish those who here work at the government, municipality is a part of the government, you have a challenge. You know, I heard this idea about every government official should be bilingual. You know, I'm going to work for the easiest part. I don't mind if it's French and Hebrew, Arabic and Dutch. But everyone who works at the municipality must speak fluently 2 languages. Okay? Can we work for that? Okay? Ouch. Some people here are not happy about this idea. We'll talk about it later. Thank you very much.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will take this.
Okay. Thank you.